I'd like to invite everybody to submit their comments at any point during today's webcast, and I, as the moderator, will try to address them throughout our webcast today. So make sure that you can find on your screen where you can enter your questions, either in the chat box or in the questions pod, and we will do our best to get a response for you. If we can't get to your questions during the webcast today, we will be posting them online and inviting our panelists to use the Ensemble network to answer those for you. We also want to give everybody a chance to continue our conversation today in person. So we will be hosting our second in-person meetup at CIM in Montreal on May 1st. So come out, meet some like-minded people, have some appetizers on us, so you can just pop into the Ensemble calendar to RSVP. So we invite everybody to participate in that. Don't forget to invite your colleagues and networks to join Ensemble and get involved. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our first webcast of the spring to learn about MiHR's Gender Equity in Mining Works initiative, affectionately referred to as GEM. My name is Sarah Gahn, and I'm the Manager of Diversity Initiatives here at MiHR. Our organization is mandated to identify and address the HR and labor market challenges and opportunities for the Canadian minerals and metals sector. We collaborate with mining and exploration companies, organized labor, contractors, educational institutions, industry associations, and Indigenous groups. On our webcast, we're proud to feature successful inclusion initiatives, and even more so when the program being featured is one of ours. So I'm going to start this webcast today by providing some background on our initiative, the GEMworks initiative. This is a 3-year project spearheaded by MiHR and funded by Status of Women Canada. What our project is trying to do is to expedite the institutional change necessary to improve gender equity in the Canadian mining and minerals industry through the application and adoption of gender-inclusive tools, training, and strategic change management initiatives for the sector. So how we're doing that is by working with these companies here. They've all committed their time, personnel, and focus to make sustainable change by testing the GEMworks tools, providing feedback, actively becoming champions, and finding and removing barriers in their organizational policies. So they're doing this by using the suite of gender inclusion resources that we've developed under the GEMworks banner. I'm going to give you a quick overview of those resources now to give you more context before we turn to our panelists. The first of those tools is the GEMworks Executive Development Session, which is an interactive experiential program. It provides senior leaders in Canada's mining and mineral sector with the inspiration, knowledge, skills for succeeding as a gender champion and for driving organizational change towards a more gender-inclusive workplace. This session provides a forum for leaders to challenge, craft, and crystallize their thinking and approach to gender. It's delivered in a half-day or a full-day format. So our participating organizations have taken this course, and the session provides an opportunity for senior leaders in mining to provide thought leadership on gender equity in mining for the industry at large, support learning among peers, and develop or enhance their ability to understand the importance of gender and of being a champion to help achieve it, demonstrate actions aligned with championing gender equity, learn how to handle difficult questions related to gender and gender equity, and take on gender championing activities efforts in a really meaningful way. The second of our tools is the Gender Equity in Mining Works Toolbox. Now, this is a resource that really helps mining companies update their policies and practices by helping them identify and remove unintended barriers and really develop a workplace that's inclusive and welcoming for both women and men. This toolbox is a step-by-step way to use a gender lens to take a fresh look at written, formalized policies, processes, and procedures. So in this image here, you can see the steps that the organizations participating are following to use this toolbox. So in there is a step-by-step worksheet that helps you guide and review and summarize the outcomes of the review, provides a lot of supporting information, including an introduction to the importance of gender issues in mining, a high-level description of the review process. It includes tools such as suggestions for choosing an area of focus organization. So using this toolbox really helps companies to create a mining and minerals industry where women and men have the best opportunities for making great contributions and having rewarding careers. The third resource that we have under our GemWorks suite is an interactive one. We have 4 e-learning modules. They're called the GemWorks Learn to Make a Difference e-learning suite. This suite has been developed to support gender inclusion change agents and other representatives in the Canadian mining and minerals companies to successfully use our GemWorks toolbox. So the participating organizations work through this process to conduct a policy review, learn about gender equity, take on gender champion roles, and use tools to organize and document the process. So let's now turn to 2 of our gender champions to hear how they and their organizations have implemented the various aspects of the GemWorks initiative. I'm very pleased to be joined by Helen Francis and Emily Moore, both very inspirational women. Helen Francis is the Director of Continuous Improvement, Base Metals at Vale Mining Company. In this role, she leads a team designed to assist the base metals operations globally to achieve operational excellence. In her previous role at Vale, Helen led the implementation of the largest business transformation project within the company in the past several years. She's taken PhD studies in mining geology at the University of British Columbia. She's attained a master's degree in mining geology from McGill University. She was also named a top 40 under 40 by the Northern Ontario Business and Greater City of Sudbury. She's chair of the board of directors of the YMCA of Sudbury and North Bay. She's also chair of the GEM Champions Taskforce, and she's an avid trail and ultramarathoner. Welcome, Helen. She's joined today by Emily Moore, the Managing Director, Water at Hatch, an international engineering company serving the mining, energy, and infrastructure sectors. As the Global Director, she manages a diverse team of over 300 specialists in Australia, South Africa, North and South Americas. Emily's team supports Hatch clients from conceptual studies through engineering, construction, and commissioning. Emily is also the chair of Hatch's Global Steering Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. Prior to this, Emily was Hatch's Director of Technology Development, responsible for the identification of new technology opportunities and working closely with all of Hatch's various businesses around the world. She has also experience in industrial R&D with Xerox for about 11 years. And if that wasn't enough, Emily was also a member of the Natural Sciences Engineering and Research Council Canada Committee for Research Partnerships. She's past president of the Canadian Society for Chemical Engineering. Emily has studied engineering chemistry at Queen's University and completed her doctorate in physical chemistry at the Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. So we're very pleased to have both Helen and Emily join us today. So I'm going to start off moderating this discussion, but I'll remind you again, let's invite everybody participating to enter your questions as they come up in the chat box online, and we'll do our best to include them as we have our discussion for the next hour or so. On that note, I'm going to open the panel today with a hypothetical question. So a company has a 10-question test it gives prospective employees. The candidates must have a score of 7 out of 10 to pass. There's 2 candidates for a job. One gets a score of 8 out of 10, the other gets 2 out of 10. The candidate that gets 8 out of 10 advances. An analyst in the organization takes a look at all the test results. The results of everybody that works for the organization. Notice that everyone who was hired received an 8 out of 10 on this test. Not only do they have similar scores, but they all got the exact same 8 questions correct. The analyst also notices the one who only got 2 out of 10 got the 2 questions that everybody else had missed. So now to our panelists. What's going on here? Should the company reconsider its approach? Helen or Emily, who'd like to tackle this hypothetical first?
I don't mind jumping in, Sarah. It's Helen. So, there's a lot of information in detail missing from the description that Sarah just provided, but certainly based on the results, I would immediately want to verify the following. Are we hiring the same type of person if every successful candidate is getting the same 8 out of 10 questions correct? And if we are hiring the same type of person, is that really the end result we want? I would assume that we don't want that we see the value in a heterogeneous group to make decisions. And as such, I would suggest to the company that they consider opportunities to improve their selection process. And there are a series of lenses that they could look through, but certainly the interview may have problems in its own setup. 10 questions alone, is that really enough to evaluate anybody? As soon as you're looking at questions as the only basis to evaluate an individual, whether they're behavioral or technical in nature, they tend to be relatively retrospective. And certainly, you know, the science and the engineering world I work in is often much more about how can you work together to understand a problem and seek solutions as a team. So are there alternative approaches to evaluating the candidates that you have, looking to ensure that you have mixed perspectives and different opinions that you're bringing into your team so that you can deliver the right results. In terms of the person who's doing the interviewing, is it just one individual? Are there multiple? Given the fact that everybody in the company only ever got the same 8 out of 10 questions correct, it's probably safe to say that they are potentially a homogeneous group. So how can they add some diversity to the interviewing panel? Or at minimum, is there some opportunity to expose those folks to their own unconscious bias and perhaps help them see some blind spots they might have and prevent a little bit of the natural inclination to hire people that are just like me? So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure Emily can add to it, but those are a few of the places I would go straight away.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit there. You know, I think this when you look at the title of this webinar of why gender inclusion matters, I think one of the reasons it matters is because there's been a lot of demonstration that a more diverse workplace and a more inclusive workplace is also a more innovative workplace. And I think this question really gets at that if you're hiring a bunch of people that think the same way, and you can measure that by this test, you know, overly simple test, let's call it, then you're not going to get that diversity of thought. And the fact that this, you know, it's a kind of an interesting construct here that this other person got the 2 that no one else got right. Out of that, I think that I would go back as a company and say, why did we ask those 2 questions? What was it that we were looking for there? And maybe that's something that we need. We asked that question because we really needed this capability in the organization, and we're not getting it right now. And so perhaps this is a signal that there's an opportunity to bring in someone that has a diverse way of thinking. And in a practical sense, you know, we're talking a lot about this at Hatch right now, where we obviously have a huge emphasis on technical excellence as an engineering firm, and so often would be testing or asking people about their technical competencies. But as Helen alluded to, ability to, you know, work in a team, ability to talk to a client and ask questions, and also to bring in some skills that maybe are less scientifically engineering technical, but getting into things like economics and social policy that are becoming more and more important to our clients. How do we evaluate those people if we want to bring in a more diverse group to come up with the more innovative solutions? So I think this to me, this goes back to looking at your interview questions, the things that you're asking, and as an organization stopping to consider, why are we asking, why are we testing for these things, and how are we weighting the balancing of those?
Thank you. I mean, this is exactly the type of critical thinking that the companies participating in the GemWorks project have been conducting, really looking at policies and procedures and thinking about whether or not there are some of those inherent unintended biases. So let's move a little bit from that theoretical to something a little more practical. So Helen, I'd like to give you an opportunity to share with everyone what Vale has been working on under the GEM initiative over the past few years. So what has been your focus in terms of policy review, and are you able to share any early successes?
Absolutely. So the way that Vale entered this was really to make sure that we first of all did a bit of a scan of where we may have systemic barriers built into various written policies, procedures, and processes, just as Sarah described, that the toolbox helps you work through. In addition, I would say that there was a conscious decision to perhaps tackle an area that we could generate some success, and perhaps as such it was a little less complex than some of the policies we we may also want to tackle in the future. So in this particular scenario, where we landed was on, what are the processes and procedures that we use for recruitment, but specifically for recruitment into our maintenance role, so the trades and technology folks that we hire. And really, at first, it was trying to understand how to use the toolkit. We identified 2 leads for this work, both male and female, so right from the get-go, trying to make sure that we were walking the talk and having that gender balance as we approached understanding the problem and those systemic barriers, as well as trying to understand what the solutions might be. And so through that, it was apparent, and I have to say that without the support of Status of Women Canada and MiHR's educational modules that they put together, in all likelihood, with all of the best intent, myself and the individuals that were doing that work may not have understood what those systemic barriers were. So the education up front was quite necessary. But as they started to understand that and then look at very simple things, just how are our postings written, it was evident that we were not using gender inclusive language. Of course, there was no intent to not be inclusive, but upon reflection, we absolutely were. So the postings were modified. In addition, the hiring panel that we have traditionally used have traditionally been folks that are the maintenance coordinators, which, given our legacy, are all male individuals today. So again, consciously, there was an addition of the balance by adding at least 1 woman to that interview panel. And as it turns out, to Emily's earlier point, also means that we have a bit of a reflection now, just not from a technical perspective in the interview panel, but more of a perspective of attitude and aptitude, given that that individual happens to come not just from a pure maintenance background, but also from more of a learning and development background. So I think in terms of just generally assessing people's capabilities beyond just technical, we've expanded our ability to do that on that interview panel. The other components of work that those folks undertook themselves, as I mentioned, through the education, was understanding their own unconscious bias, and I think that was quite revealing for all of us who have been through some of that work. I think with all the best of intents, we all want to believe that we're open-minded and fair to everyone, but sometimes it does take a little bit of that reflection to dig a bit deeper just to understand where your biases exist. Doesn't mean they're going to change overnight, but at least you can be aware of that and try to put some countermeasures in place to make sure that you're not being unduly biased towards favoring someone over another, or perhaps factors that really are meaningless at the end of the day. So that is what we have done. We have now started to bring people through that process who've applied to the posting and have got through the interviews. It became pretty apparent to us that we still, of course, have the issue with the pipeline. So Dave Desminski, who was the gentleman who's been part of that working group, very quickly identified, certainly believe, hand over heart, that we've improved the process, but with a very small population of women in the colleges that we are generally reaching out to, it's very hard at this point for us to really see if it's making a difference. So there is an ongoing recognition that we have to work with that pipeline. So again, traditionally we would have sent the maintenance coordinators out to the colleges and to the grade schools to encourage folks to consider careers with Vale and along the maintenance path in general. And now again, we are also trying to make sure that we send the few female mechanics and maintenance folks that we have out to those locations, so that the girls in the grade schools and the young ladies who are in the colleges can start to see that there are role models in that field and perhaps consider career paths that they might not be choosing if they cannot see the role models that look like them in those areas.
Well, thanks for that quick overview, Helen. I know the team from Vale has just grabbed this toolbox and absolutely ran with it. And the GemWorks policy review was really designed to be versatile and flexible. And each participating company has identified a different area for consideration in their policy review. Emily, can you tell us a little bit about what Hatch has been examining under this project, and can you share why that was selected?
Yeah, so we've also been doing recruitment, but we've been focusing on our university recruitment policies, and I think one of the things that we've struggled with a little bit is that our policies maybe aren't as written down as many others. I shouldn't say that they're casual, but it's a lot more about practice than policy. Our policies are, non-discrimination policies, standard, standard code of conduct, legal stuff. But what we're actually doing when we're going out to universities, and more importantly, how we are representing ourselves when we go out and engage with universities, we haven't been giving a lot of thought to from a diversity point of view. And so that exercise has started with a few recent grads, as well as one of our HR directors, going through our campus recruitment policy or practices and talking about things and sort of observing who we're sending out to the campuses, what they're saying, how we are representing ourselves, what events we are participating in at the, whether it's a career fair or as opposed to maybe targeting women in engineering type events, for example. So we're starting to really assess all of that, get feedback from some of our students who are here this year as well on how they're perceiving Hatch as a recruiter, because obviously if we want to recruit more women to Hatch, we need to be seen as an employer of choice for women. And some of the really interesting stuff that's coming back from that is when we go out to campus recruiting, we are usually sending our hiring managers, maybe some of our young recent grads, or a few more senior people who are talking very much about their career paths. And that's sort of been the traditional way that we have represented ourselves. And one of the comments back from our team is that the number of questions that we are actually getting from our interested parties who are considering Hatch as an employment option are that they're interested in things like, what are our policies on parental leave? How do we handle work-life balance? Those sorts of questions. And we haven't been adequately prepping the people we're sending out to site to answer those questions. So we need to start doing a better job at not only selecting who we're sending out to make sure that we've got gender and race diversity, but also to make sure that the people who are going out are equipped to be able to answer some of the questions that we know are important to women and increasingly to young men as well, who are considering what career selection they want to make. And so we're now starting to take all of that feedback and look at how can we impact our hiring cycle for September. So we kind of did this observation during the May, the hiring cycle for this May, so our new grads and our co-op students, and we are now looking at moving forward, how can we take what we've learned and start to put in maybe some new practices and some new considerations, right down to things like what do we put up front in the presentation on Hatch that we give at whatever events that we're attending at campus. So we've been really looking at very much at practice on that first engagement all the way back to then the more standard questions around who is the hiring panel, do we have females on the hiring panel, and then we are now starting as well to track what is the number of women hired, which we've always tracked, but also what are the number of women applying to the positions, being interviewed for the positions, getting offers and hiring. So we're actually now tracking all of those things to see if we can start to move the needle.
Well, that's great, and a really important aspect of this GemWorks project is the policy review and the process review that you both spoke about, which has obviously been an area of success for both companies, but it also includes tapping senior leaders in mining companies to act as those gender champions. Years of research indicates that without that leadership support, diversity and inclusion initiatives become nice to have and really secondary to other business goals. Helen, are you able to share with us what it means to you to be a gender champion and why becoming a champion mattered to you and still matters to you?
Absolutely. You might have to cut me off here because I could probably speak endlessly on this topic. But certainly for me, the first factor is personal experience. So, I was one of 2 women in my undergrad program in mining and exploration geology out of a class of 20. And I have to admit, and I'll be very transparent with everybody, at the age of 18, I thought that sounded pretty good. 1 to 10 blokes, how could it be bad? But certainly after 3 years, I have to say that I really missed, and I never thought I would, I really missed a balanced environment with a balanced approach to both how we did the work within our classes, but also how we, celebrated and used our free time after the fact. So I missed some of that, I think, the tone that comes with a balanced working group. Then through my own work and life experience, I've certainly found that my best experiences at work and in life have been where I've had the opportunity to work with those heterogeneous groups, diverse in all their ways, whether we're talking about gender, age, culture, heritage, sexual orientation, or academic backgrounds, etc. Those diverse teams have not only been able to deliver great solutions to the problems that we've tackled, but it's also created a really fun environment to work within, where we learn from each other and about things that are relevant to the work, but also about things that are more relevant to the bigger questions of life as a whole. Emily also spoke to this, but certainly research absolutely points to the fact that the best solutions come from bringing together diverse viewpoints. You get ranges of perspectives, spectrums of expertise. It helps you have a more robust critical evaluation. Just the fact of having different perspectives also helps you draw attention to shared assumptions that may be implicitly used as guiding practices, but should they be? So that is a very important factor as well. And I think also, the resource sector itself, and I don't know if we celebrate and understand and help people across society understand this. It's perhaps one of the most complex sectors out there. I mean, we are balancing the technical issues of how to extract ores at greater depths in harsh, seismically active environments. For areas such as Emily, it's about making sure that when you're extracting under aquifers, you're not, creating floods and potentially very catastrophic events like that. And also socially, we very much have to balance the needs to produce those metals with the increasing demand that we are respectful of the environments that we work in with the indigenous communities and other communities that we often are operating on their land, or at least in close proximity to. And commercially, it's also about maintaining a competitive advantages for companies and shareholder interest, but also very much about valuing and respecting our employees and being those companies of choice. And for me, that blend, and I've only touched on a few of the similarities in action there, are critical. And if we don't have those diverse perspectives and different viewpoints, I really do not believe that we will make the right long-term decisions that help us balance those factors appropriately. And then personally, I stand for diversity in all shapes and forms. My experience is one that just helps me speak more prominently around gender equity. So I think that's why I feel it's something that I really need to play a role in. And I would also add to that my experience is, even I think I was reading in Engineering Dimensions this past month, a PEO Mercer OSPE survey that tends to say the same thing that we see in lots of research studies, that women cite that they're leaving engineering at higher rates than men because of career change, personal family issues, lack of career training and opportunities. And while I don't doubt that's a factor, I have to say that personally I am not convinced that is the overarching reason when you look at how many women do enter other careers that are equally, if not more so, difficult to balance family and life around. And I'll think about nursing with the crazy shifts they work, midwifery when you're on call at, I don't know, any time of the day. And so there's a big piece of me that thinks it's often because we really don't see those role models in the careers that engineering can lead us into, and certainly not in necessarily roles at the upper echelons of the hierarchy. And I think there's two factors that come into play there. One, for the women that are in those roles, they're extremely busy. And secondly, I think that there's a general sense for some of those folks that have managed to get that far that maybe they've been able to overcome some of the systemic barriers that potentially could have been in their way. And if they've overcome them, why couldn't others? And I commend them for getting that far, but I do think that perhaps when you've made it, you also need to reach down and help lift up others so that we can really have the gender equity that we're looking for.
Thank you, Helen. And Emily, can you tell us a little bit about why being a gender champion is important to you, and as such that you joined this project?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I've actually had kind of a shift in my own thinking. I would say up until about a year and a half ago, I sort of saw my role for women in engineering as an extracurricular activity. And so it was, something I did on weekends, something I did through quiet relationships within the organization, but I didn't feel, maybe I didn't feel comfortable sticking my neck out to sort of take this on as a cause at work. And in fact, I was pulled into it by our CEO, who asked myself and a few other women to step up and look at this issue. And that happened around the time that I had some sort of industry recognition as an inspiring woman in this field, which was, kind of funny to me in that I hadn't taken this on as an active role. And I think a lot of my reluctance was, up until that time, had been maybe not feeling safe to do it, but also wanting to be judged as someone who was contributing technically or from a business point of view, and not somebody who was drawing a lot of attention to my femaleness. And maybe that was because I was senior in the organization and there were not a lot of other women around me that I could compare with. So it's been really a bit of a journey on taking on this on as a work role, as an active role, chairing the diversity steering committee at Hatch and doing more activities like this, representing Hatch and talking about these issues. And it's been very exciting, very frustrating as well, because obviously change is way slower than we want to see. We are now talking about issues that we haven't been raising as much as we could have in the past. And so there's sometimes a frustration that as I'm having conversations with women, I'm sometimes appalled at how little has changed in the last 25 years from when I first started in the industry, whether that's sort of people's experience on sites or people's experience even in the office, where people are still struggling with sort of a boys club mentality, a what are you doing here mentality, and so we want to be pushing back on that and sort of making sure that things aren't chipping away at the confidence of the women who are working with us and with our clients. So it's been exciting to sort of take my extracurricular passion and marry it in with what I'm doing at work. And Helen talked about that feeling of responsibility. I think that is really key, that I have a responsibility to the women that are in my organization and the women who are in the industry, but also as a business leader at Hatch, I have a responsibility to the business. And if we can't be helping to keep diverse people in the organization, if we can't be allowing people to realize their potential, then we're not accomplishing the goals that we've set out for ourselves as an organization, and we're not going to have a a healthy and productive and innovative organization. And so it's been nice to be able to knit together that through this program. And the GEM program for me has been really great because it's allowed me to connect in with other practitioners, other people who are struggling with these issues and are often at different phases in their companies, and in thinking about this and sort of share best practices, have a bit of a reality check of where we're at in the industry, and being able to hear really inspirational leadership from people like Helen at Vale and Tudela at Goldcore. I mean, there's some really exciting stuff happening in the industry, and so it's been great to bring that back and help accelerate things and learn from some long journeys in other parts of the industry.
Well, I think both those the answers to that question from both of you really exemplifies your ability as gender champions, because I think you both bring up a lot of really important points, and really, you know, it's that passion we can hear underlying that really elevates the conversation as well. And we have titled this project Gender Equity because we know how important it is to include both men and women. We didn't call this women's equality. This is gender equity. We need to include men in the conversation. We need to include them to really make sure that the changes and actions around inclusion work for everyone. So men are an absolutely vital part of this conversation, and each participating company has included men in every aspect of the gendered policy review process. Emily, can you tell us about the role that men are playing in your project and in the wider changes towards inclusion at Hatch?
Sure. So I mentioned before that this program started for Hatch because our CEO, John Bianchini, sort of called a group of us together and sort of pulled hard on this. And that was a response to you know, questions that he was getting from people within the organization, from clients, from his own daughters, and it sort of has become something that he's really championed in our organization as something that's really important, and one of our top priorities is addressing diversity and inclusion. And he's been speaking about it very regularly at town halls and through other communications, and that's actually been extremely important, I think, because it's spoken to giving people permission to start talking about these things, to feel safe to start talking about these things more than we had in the past, and I talked about that already a little bit. It's also, I've also been really pleased at the number of men who have responded to this call to help out on this. And when I've given talks at Hatch about diversity, or others have, we're seeing more and more men participating, and I've had more and more men contacting me to say, I care about this issue, I want to know more about this issue, how can I participate in the training? How can I participate in the things that we're doing? So that's actually been really exciting. And again, a lot of them will talk about the fact that they have daughters or they have wives who they're seeing, or coworkers who they're seeing going through things and wanting to change the way that things are done. And some of the most exciting things that I'm seeing with the men that we're dealing with is them. One of the huge roles that men can play is actually speaking up when things are not fair, speaking up when things are not acceptable. And the reason that's so important is because it becomes exhausting if for women to constantly be feeling like they have to point these things out. And a lot of us learn to let things just sort of roll off our backs. It's actually really refreshing when someone else says, wait a second, that actually doesn't make any sense, or why are we doing it that way? And so on our global steering committee, we actually have almost 50-50 men and women. John Bianchini, as our CEO, is the sponsor of that panel. And then we have lots of men getting involved in our regional action committees as well. And in fact, one of our regional chairs is also a man. And so it's exciting that we've got good participation from men, and I think it's incredibly important. The other really key thing that we're seeing is that when you start to talk about things like work-life balance, this millennial generation coming in, a lot of young parents, men and women are sharing this. There's a lot of double income families. There's a lot of, we have a lot of spouses who work for us at Hatch and are both in technical fields and highly demanding fields. And so having people, you know, the men care about these issues because of the change and how work is being divided in the home and how people are managing their own lives. And so I think that's also quite exciting, this generational change that we're seeing and real interest from young men moving forward.
Thank you, Emily. And it just occurred to me to point out that although we have two fabulous female champions on this call today, that we do have male champions participating in this project as well. And actually our panel that MiHR is hosting at CIM on this same topic is made up mostly of men talking about the importance of being a gender champion. So I thought I'd throw that in there so that everybody in the audience was aware that men really are engaged in this whole process. Helen, can you share with us how you and Vale identified your male project partner, Dave, and the impact that he has had on the project's success?
Certainly. Just to re-emphasize what both Sarah and Emily have said, diversity and inclusion is certainly not a single issue that can be tackled by any one sector of society. And so gender inclusion isn't just a women's issue to fix. We need men at the table too. So it was really important that we, when we agreed with the MiHR recommendation, that we have men and women working on this particular topic. So in terms of how we identified a male partner, I guess we came up with a series of criteria, and the few that that I think are most pertinent is we certainly wanted someone that was respected for their work and the role they hold in the organization, seen as credible, seen as someone who has lived the reality of operations, so that any recommendations he made couldn't be somehow brushed aside or argued that he doesn't know what it's like in the real world. In addition, we wanted to choose someone who we believed would be an ally for diversity and inclusion in all its forms, so that we were working with someone who supported this notion, even if they perhaps didn't quite understand what role they could yet play. And then thirdly, because we knew that the process that we wanted to take on was recruitment, then we wanted to make sure that we were working with someone who understood that particular process, would certainly help us use the toolbox to understand the systemic barriers there. So we were very fortunate. We had someone who ticked all those boxes in all of those categories, and Dave Desminski was the individual that we chose. He's a manager of maintenance systems for Vale in Ontario. And I think he represents the attitudes of, happily, I think, the majority of men in our organization, in that he certainly intends to be gender inclusive. I think there are very few that don't want to be. They just, again, are not aware of some of those systemic barriers that exist or their own unconscious bias. But he was very surprised and very humble, and humble enough to learn through the exercise, whether it was the learning modules or unconscious bias training, just how much he did have to learn about the barriers that face women in the organization, where those systemic barriers existed, and perhaps more importantly, once understanding them, be a real advocate and change agent to make sure that we identified the right actions and put those actions into play. I think the power of Dave's story is not only the changes that we have seen in how we go about recruitment for our maintenance roles, but truly him sharing from his perspective how much he had to learn and was open to learning as he went through this process. And for me, it just exemplifies the fact that we all have blind spots, but sometimes it does take some supports and tools to help you see them before you can start to address them.
Well, thanks so much for that, Helen. We've got some great questions coming in from our audience online, so I'm going to turn to some of those now, and I invite everybody that's still listening to keep entering your questions. We're going to do our best to get to them. So I'm going to jump to a question that fits in nicely here with the conversation that we're having right now. So Emily mentioned that she's shocked at how little has changed for women in the past 25 years, both in offices and on work sites, and identified the continuation of the boys' club mentality in workplaces. The GEM tools can obviously assist with identifying ways to bring more women into a workplace through recruitment and so on. Are there any examples from Vale or Hatch in respect to how the GEM program has forced or encouraged gender culture change? For example, challenging the boys' club or changing masculinities at work?
I can go first. I think this is all part of having the conversation and having the discussion. And you know, things are changing, but you know, I think Helen, you know, made some really good points about as you start having these conversations and pointing things out, things come to the surface that even the most well-intentioned guy may not have been aware of, because it is about experience. So I can give an example where we were, you know, when we were discussing at one of our steering committees, I think that a lot of the sort of senior level management hadn't maybe been hearing about some of the regular, you know, maybe they're not big enough to file complaints. They're not big enough to perhaps that people would do something about from an HR point of view, but sort of the comments, the things that people are dealing with that are frustrating to them and that are building up over time. And I think in that conversation, the understanding that some things actually do matter to women, that some things that are assumed or are said actually starts to create that culture, actually starts to lead to people changing what they're doing. One really simple example from that's come out of this conversation has been meeting protocol. One of the things that we've heard from a lot of women is that when they go into a meeting, quite often the young female engineer is the one who's asked to set up the meeting and is the default person to do the minutes. And starting to sort of say, okay, we need to be rotating roles in meetings. And so our Australian organization has actually now started to look at how do we actually start to kind of get that out and make that happen, so that the roles are being rotated in meetings, and that we're not kind of sinking into assumptions, because the women weren't speaking up to complain necessarily about the fact that they got stuck with the minutes all the time and they were doing sort of a certain role and not getting a chance to do other things. But it was observed from the conversation that this was happening, and honestly, people hadn't even thought about it before. So I think that's a simple thing that starts to allow people to be more conscious of what they're doing and little things that they can do to improve the inclusiveness and the participation and the range of opportunities that we're giving people, and that starts to change the culture.
And Helen, I would add on to exactly what Emily has described. It's absolutely through the conversations that you can start to change culture. I also think that, you know, building upon kind of those small incremental changes that are more tactical in nature that Emily just provided a great example of. You know, if you stand back about 30,000 feet and we start to look at the cultural change that we are trying to drive in many of our organizations, where we are looking at truly being employers of choice, where we speak about wanting to have an engaged workforce. And what does that mean? Well, it means that they're doing something that's meaningful and sustained. They're involved in an activity that perhaps is bigger than just themselves. As we start to drive the leadership behaviors that can develop that type of culture, I also think that those are the same leadership behaviors that are going to need and create an environment that is very diverse and inclusive, because it is really a beginning to recognize that yes, you need technical knowledge, and not to disparage anybody with lots of undergraduate degrees and masters and PhDs and all that good stuff. But if you can hire people with the right aptitude and train them technically, you will probably have a much more engaged and successful workforce. So I think Emily's right. We have to translate then that kind of theoretical perspective down to what does that mean tactically and in action. But I certainly think that if we are true to ourselves and striving for those continuously improving and engaged cultures, that it will also necessitate the behaviors that drive diversity and inclusion.
And that point around the importance of culture leads directly into another question that's been asked here, Helen. Helen, Vale, with its very old Inco history, has a deep institutional knowledge. How do you or are you making a case for innovation and diversity of thought in such a large company that's so steeped in tradition?
It's a great question. I think, you know, I'm probably fortunate in my perspective that I come from with continuous improvement in our organization. The reality is, it's absolutely truth that we have, you know, a legacy of 100+ years, and we have a culture, and I'll say that the cultures are different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and they are different from a mining environment to a surface environment. But if I pick on one of the hardest, which is probably our underground environment, you know, that is a culture that has had pride in the fact that it was a largely brawn-based working environment where strength was extremely important, where we have over the course of time become quite risk-adverse and for obvious safety reasons. And those are just to name two of the factors. But as we start to try to shift to a culture where we really want to empower everybody underground in all of our crews, including our frontline operators and maintainers, it asks us to challenge those types of things around our risk tolerance. Similarly, it starts to say, do you have the right leadership behaviors that can really encourage that kind of safe working environment for problems to be exposed, and it is causing us to sit back and say, do we have the right people in those roles? It brings us back to the aptitude and attitude type conversations, which then ultimately connect to, you know, if you've only ever hired the same type of person that are technically solid but not necessarily great people leaders, maybe your problem is that you don't have a diverse enough and inclusive enough workforce, and hence the conversation comes back around to, well, then look at your numbers, and if you take the proxy of, you know, just that one slice of the number of women in your workforce, which I'll be quite honest is low, it has not grown significantly since the 80s here in Ontario, at least for Vale, then one would, I think, easily point to the fact that we don't have the right culture to encourage diversity, and hence we get back into, so what can we do, and the importance of these types of education modules, understanding your unconscious bias, putting the actions in place through the toolboxes, and I think critical to me is then understanding those leadership capabilities that you need to really drive change.
Well, thank you, Helen. That was a great answer to a very difficult question. Let's pull out a question here that I think fits nicely for Emily, especially with your focus on recruiting engineers in university. There's a question here: should there be more presentations from women engineers at high school career fairs?
Yes, you know, I think it's always good to get, you know, obviously there's a lot of different programs like WISE programs and others to get more role models out talking to women or to girls in high school and even earlier than that, encouraging people to choose engineering. One thing that Hatch does is we sponsor a lot of FIRST robotics teams, and see that as another opportunity to get people, you know, engaging in science and engineering. I think the reason I kind of hesitated in my answer is that one of the challenges that women have in the workforce, whether that's at a university or anywhere else, is that there's a huge amount of demand on them to do a lot of this stuff. And so I think that where we as an organization can support people going and doing those things and make that one of our community relationship type activities, I think that's great. I think that sort of adding another burden to people to say, on your own time, you need to do this because this is your personal responsibility as a woman, starts to get a little more problematic. So I think we've really tried to balance that and support our employees in doing those sorts of outreach events and making that easy to do, so that we're not overly burdening adding yet one more thing that women have to do to their already very busy schedule. So our approach is to support the people that have passion for this and to support the organizations that have passion for this and do whatever we can to help people participate in this. But to make it, let's say, a requirement for women at Hatch, I think would be wrong-headed.
Well, we're getting close on time, so this is going to be the last question. So if we didn't get to your question today, I'm just going to remind you I'm going to post them up online and we'll continue the discussion. Our panelists have agreed that they'll be able to go online and respond to them there, so we'll continue the discussion online. So here's a great wrap-up question, and I'll pose that to both of you. What are the risks that you see in not increasing diversity in employees and management in your organization?
I think that the industry will actually die if we don't increase diversity, and I think that's why you're seeing companies like BHP have published this very aggressive 50% target, that they want 50% gender diversity, which is it's like an incredible goal that they published to challenge themselves. I think there's a number of issues. One is just from workforce, and the educated population is actually diverse, and so if you're only selecting from a subset of that population, you're cutting off an arm to do the work. And we've talked about the importance of diversity for innovation, and innovation is what is going to keep this industry alive and going and facing the challenges. Helen already alluded to the fact that that a lot of mining hasn't changed as much as it needs to change, and now we're seeing increased regulatory and social responsibility and community challenges, and those are areas that need a different way of thinking, and companies have recognized that. They're working to try and address that, but we need people that think a little bit differently, helping us to work through those things. And I'm willing to guess for that that we see a lot of women in those sorts of areas, in our social responsibility, in our environmental areas. Certainly from an engineering point of view, civil engineering is one of the areas, because of the environmental option, that a lot of women go into, for example. So we need to be trying to have more diverse workforce to be able to face the challenges that the industry faces.
Thank you. And Helen, can you identify, we have not much time left, just one risk that you see if we don't embrace diversity?
I would really just emphasize everything that Emily says. I too believe that we will die, based on the virtue of the fact that with the complexity of the issues that we have to deal with, if we don't have a diverse workforce that we're working with to come up with those solutions, we will make the wrong decisions, and we will put the wrong solutions, and likely there won't be solutions in place, and we will lose our social license to operate.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your expertise and wealth of knowledge on this really important topic with us. Unfortunately, our time has run out today, but I'm inviting everybody to stay connected. Let's continue this conversation in our online space. Post your questions there. If there's something else that comes into your mind as you reflect on this, we will definitely see if we can get you an answer or point you towards some more resources. So thank you both so much for joining us. Goodbye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and hopefully you'll be able to log in again next month for our webcast, where we'll be joined by the Mental Health Commission of Canada, who's going to be talking to us about the importance of mental health at work. So thanks again to both of you.
Thank you.